I think we acknowledge that water is a shared resource, whether it's at local level, subnational, national, and even cross-territorial. But I think we really need to agree to the principle of subsidiarity. That yes, we have this sovereignty, we have our boundaries, territorial boundaries, but they don't mean anything if we cannot share this. We cannot agree on how we jointly, collectively agree on how we manage the resource.
And I think the Nile Basin discourse, how do you get everybody around the same table?
Yeah,
we could be engaging in fanciful rhetoric at this point.
Yeah.
Because we haven't got around to discuss what we have to discuss yet. I don't see it in my mind's eye.
Yeah, we have been having discussion around the cooperative framework agreement, for example, that we are going on trying to discuss within countries and then bringing it to the basin level, which has not been easy. And an example is the UN Convention on non-navigational water sources, which countries have gone at different levels. Why do we drag our feet in getting things done? I think there are issues that we need to look at governance, and this I think we need to look at indicators that are related to outcomes than the number games that we are struggling with. Outcome level, that what do we really want to see within governance that we need to change, so that we have sovereignty, but I think subsidiarity is more important, so that we equitably use this resource, we equitably manage, get everybody responsible at local government level, at national level, and transboundary levels.
Thank you very much. Minister Mokonyane, education, and we go back to the South African situation, which is your own. We're talking about education. You want the woman's face. You want the woman and the child to be the face of the SDG agenda. I'm asking you, if these are cross-cutting initiatives, what is there in your educational system that is teaching young people to be aware of the primacy of water? Because you've just said, we've all agreed we're an exiting generation. What are we doing to educate the young to appreciate our concerns here?
What has been a setback over time was that issues of water and water resource management were left to engineers and people behind the scenes. And what becomes a game changer, it's when you make it everybody's business. And you start even at early childhood development with programs about hygiene, about respect for the resource, dealing with issues of skills development and transfer of knowledge and information.
But Minister, you said the rights were embedded in your constitution. Is there an effort? I'm asking you. I don't know the answer. Is it embedded in the educational curriculum?
Precisely because it's a constitutional right. You have to then say what then becomes the responsibility of the state and the citizen. And you see it through your early childhood development programs, your public awareness programs, and the fact that we now have created networks in terms of partnerships in South Africa that are very viable and functional, and the review of policy, which I think also becomes a major game changer.
But Minister, I'm still asking, is every South African child in school aware? Is there something in the curriculum where they walk into a classroom and they say, water is life, do something to protect it?
In fact, the face of
because
water...
you can't examine it. You can't examine that in an exam and get A+ for
It's
water.
not even in the school. Even the pictorial face of a Department of Water and Sanitation has a young boy and a tap with running water. So that then you demonstrate in reality what exactly is happening. And if you're not going to have that water movement that brings everybody on board, you'll then lose it. And I think this is one of the things that we've been able to deal with. And the depiction of a woman who'll be walking barefoot, pregnant, and carrying a bucket of water indicates what we want to discard. In the future, with women becoming engineers, becoming planners, and politicians, and policymakers, it has happened. This is the fourth female minister in 20 years who's been a minister responsible for water. But for the first time, post the 20 years, we then created a standalone department. It used to be a department of water, environment, forestry, and everything. But now it is a department solely for water and sanitation. It is happening. It is not where we want it to be, but it demonstrates that we've learned from others through partnerships that we have had with various countries, but also we have also looked at local solutions because they work much better.
Thank you. I'm I'm just going back to my African brother and sister there. That we heard the C word, corruption, and the whole machine seems to have Africa. The Africa region seems to have a monopoly on corruption within government. I see heads being shaken. But let's address our own concerns just to see what's happening here. Let's go back to the measurables, indicators. Is corruption something that can be mastered with measurable indicators? Or does it rely entirely on goodwill and faith and spirituality?
Transparency becomes very important if you have to deal with corruption and perceived corruption in some instances. But we also have to deal with the corrupter and the corruptee. Because in many instances we don't deal with the one who corrupts, and when it is the private sector, it's called collusion. So we need to deal also with those kind of issues, so that then at the end of the day we do not also have a challenge in terms of the credibility of government and the integrity. Political stability is quite important, because it is also one thing that I think for us, coming from emerging democracies and in Africa, this has been one of the major issues. But if you look over the past 20 years, there's been, to a large extent, the intention to embrace the values of transparency and accountability. But I want to also talk about international support.
Very quickly.
One thing that we need, we don't need international support that comes to Africa, give the support without transferring the skills and leaving a legacy in Africa, so that then they can be sustenance through our own capability. And we have seen it in some of the countries. One good example that I can talk about is our experience of how donor funding has delayed development in Lesotho.
Thank you. Mr. Moss, sorry, you had a gut reaction to that gut reaction.
But it wasn't not really a gut reaction. What I wanted to do was build on the question of transparency and indicators. Because corruption is something that goes on in the shadows. If we can start measuring things properly, and the word properly is very important, it gets much more difficult for people to indulge in whatever you like to call it, corruption, extortion, all the rest of it. So indicators are really important in being able to not stamp out corruption, but at least put the focus on part of it and get rid of it. And that's what one of the things that the WIN has been working on, is how do they have indicators specific to corruption. But the transparency word, the integrity word are really important in this, and they won't happen by themselves. We only will happen if we measure, as you said, Donald, the outputs that we're looking for. And when the outputs are being measured properly, it gets harder and harder and harder for the people to want to divert funds or effort or power or whatever into places where it shouldn't be. And that's why indicators, or one of the reasons why indicators are important.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kasonga, before we go to another round of questions, in your discourse, the Nile Basin, what is your response to this whole idea of transparency, integrity, corruption?
Corruption appears to be on the agenda all the time, but I think it's slippery because it's a consequence. It's not the core problem. the core problem starts with governance. If we don't get governance right, then we have resulting corruption, and then we don't know what to do with it. Do you establish institutions? Do you make rules? So we are struggling. But I think we need to look at what do we need to do with our local governance. And local governance is very important because that's where things begin. If we have all these elements of governance, transparency, participation, and everybody takes responsibility, then we can block the road to corruption. But dealing with the corruption, thinking we can put all the indicators, hundreds of them, will never achieve. So we really need to look at what can make a good participatory local governance.
Thank you. Kari?
Great, thank you. I'm going to come out to the floor if there are any final comments or questions. I do want to just, for those who've been quite active on Twitter, following up on what the minister from South Africa talked about, the youth, the Water Youth Network actually asked, can the panelists tell us how they concretely plan to involve young people in the SDG process and the implementation process, which I think is a very good question. The other question I'd like to call out is what methodology or strategies and platforms are you, as water and sanitation sector leaders, going to employ to ensure that we achieve our envisaged dedicated goal on water? And then finally is, I think mainly here for the ministers perhaps, is now that you are here representing your constituencies and from your countries, what will you be saying to your heads of states as a message as they prepare for September? So a bit on the spot for you. But I just want to come back out and let me run over here before we then have to conclude the session, just to give a chance for any more questions.
Thank you. Jan Rasmussen from DHI. I would like to have a question on the implementation side. Having an SDG in place on water in September, what would be the single most important international or global initiative or action that will support implementation at the national level?
Great, thank you. And let me go right over here. Let me enter through.
Thanks a lot. I'm Martin Koreman from Utrecht University in the Netherlands. I like to ask how you will actually reach the citizens, where you talk about in the first panel session that it's important to reach citizens. It's also important to reach stronger agreements between nations and transboundary policy. But how will you actually reach this? And I think it's very important, to inspire the people here how they can reach this in their countries.
Thank you very much. Extreme notions being... you want another question?
No, Karen? I just wanted to, if there's one end final, because I know we're running shorter on time, if there's any final. Okay.
I think, Monsieur Jarreau, if I can come to you, if you, there was lots to follow there, but there was the gentleman who said the one single most on an international level over there. Would you try to address that, or ask it again?
No, yeah. I got the question.
Exactly.
But for issues such as the water issue, with all due respect, I think it's a dangerous approach, because it gives the impression that by doing one thing you have solved a majority of the problem. I don't believe it can be done. So I would not suggest one thing. I would rather concentrate on a small number of things, and this is exactly what we are trying to do through the targets, to identify a number of things, but not one, please, because I would not like to give the impression if you do that, essentially you have solved the biggest fraction of the problem. But while I have the floor, I'm sorry, can I answer another question? This was a question about the young...
I'll stop you when I have
okay.
to. I have no fear.
Now, I was keen to say something about the involvement of the young people, because when we were developing this proposal for the SDGs, actually there was an online consultation survey, which was very, very successful. And a little bit like what happened in other things, it happened that the consultation on the water was the most successful by far of all the consultation. And for a number of reasons, which you know well, the young people are really well represented I was careful not to use the word overrepresented, but they are well represented in this kind of use of new technology. So definitely their input was very much welcome, but was more than welcome. It was very much taken on board. And the beauty is that young people do not look only at their local interests. They look at the planet. And that's only a very useful perspective. So yes, we took that on board, and we intend to build on that success stories. We intend to continue to go even further with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the interest of involving all my panel at the end, I can see hands going up. Choose the final word. Monsieur Jarreau, you'll be last because we've just heard you. And for you, ministers, you were told what's the message that you're taking back home. So maybe within your final remarks you could do that. And again, there are 2, 4, 6 of us. You work it out, and then we'll have our rapporteur. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are, unless again I'll come to if there's a burning, scorching heat kind of question, we'll take it, but this is it from our panel. Mr. Moss, would you please?
You want me to answer a question or make some profound remark?
Yes, a profound remark is a... profundity is what I'm looking for.
That doesn't really come naturally to me, profound remarks.
This is his first profound remark.
I think the stakes are actually extremely high. I'm just reading for the second time a very interesting book by Jared Diamond called Collapse. And in the first chapter of that, he describes the principal characteristics of societies that have collapsed in the past. And the difference between today and the ones he was talking about is that those societies were all self-contained and isolated. We're no longer in a self-contained and isolated world. And water was one of those things that caused collapse. So we're looking from now to 2030. All the indicators of societal collapse exist at the global level, which means that the underlying objective of the Sustainable Development Goals, to achieve a sustainable use of our planetary resources into the future, is in a hugely important stake. And I think the integration of all of the Sustainable Development Goals together is really the issue of our generation. And if we don't face up to that, there probably will not be another generation. That's a rather pessimistic way to conclude, perhaps. But if we turn that round and look at the positive, we know what we've got to do. So let's get on with it.
Mrs. Kakabadze?
I'm left with an unanswered question, or not fully answered question, about what would we do to have society participate in the concern, but also in action, to be more responsible with water. And what I would do is to work on health and agriculture. Probably health more in the developing countries, where 40%, I speak about my country, Ecuador, 40% of the population of child mortality is caused by polluted water. And that's easy to sell, in the sense that a family, a mother, a father, young people and adults do understand what the implications of polluted water are in relation to survival. And in terms of agriculture, probably, no. I was going to say probably more for the developed world, but it's for everybody. It doesn't matter which continent, north, south, east, or west. In agriculture, we do have to understand, to learn, to acknowledge that eating a kilo of beef implies drinking 3,000 liters of water. Unless we understand the relationship in production and consumption, I don't think we, the normal citizens, will react and be more responsible about how we eat, how we produce, how we consume. And in that link of agriculture and water, consumption and production patterns is absolutely essential to have an active society working on water responsibility.
Thank you very much. Mr.